Dear friends, I am very glad to see you all here. The meetings within the G20 Youth Summit have become regular, and I remember very well in 2006 when we were preparing the G8, I personally met with the participants of the Youth Summit when the young people of different countries, of the leading 8 economies of the world, were discussing different topics, were formulating recommendations for the leaders of G8. And I believe that it is very good that we have expanded to G20. The biggest and the promising economies of the world. And what matters more is that you are participating in our work. You are young people. You are always looking into the future. You are always acting directly, but always efficiently. I know that in your sections you have discussed different issues. You may be aware that the priorities of the Russian presidency: first, we are working to maintain the continuity of what our friends and partners have achieved in Mexico, and the tasks that we set to ourselves for the oncoming work in St. Petersburg here in September are already formulated, are already on paper. I know that you are aware of them. This is efficient regulation, attracting investments, transparency in all regards. I have just met the representatives of business community of all our countries, and as a matter of fact, we and my colleagues, already gray-haired colleagues, efficient leaders of the biggest corporations of the G20 countries, we have discussed all those topics. We have discussed those topics for around 2 hours, quite long, and I wouldn't actually tell you everything that I have been telling to the representatives of the business community right now. I would like to invite you to a very informal discussion. I would gladly hear your suggestions, and after that, we will discuss the problems that are most important to you, that are most critical to you, in order to make the leaders of G20 economies aware of those problems and probably implement your suggestions in our final documents. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Let me take on the initiative. First of all, I would like to hand you over this document. This is the final declaration of the Youth G20 Summit. It has been adopted today, and it was adopted also yesterday. There were 5 representatives from each G20 country, as well as the representatives from other countries invited to the summit. And preliminarily, the suggestions, the proposals were also collected through internet. The suggestions, the proposals are very interesting. They are in line with the G20 agenda, but they have a certain youth flavor in them. And first of all, I would like to give floor to the representatives of the so-called G3 sitting here, Mexico, Russia, and Australia. They will brief you about those recommendations, and after that, we will be able to discuss them. And I would like to give the floor first to the representative of Mexico, Luis Alfredo Nunes, the leader of the Mexican delegations. The floor is yours, sir.
To be here. On behalf of the Mexican delegation, we would like to thank the Russian presidency and the Russian Sherpa for hosting the Y20 summit, for following on the Mexican initiative of having the Y20 as part of the official agenda within the G20 mechanism. We would also like to take this opportunity to recognize the excellent agenda setting that the Russian Federation has made by including growth as the principal guiding theme for this year's G20 presidency. And well, let me give you a summary of some of the main agreements that we came about after fruitful discussions between the delegates here present. Regarding the strengthening of financial regulations, we recommend the G20 heads of state to act against tax havens by working out a mechanism that could possibly include the establishment of special taxes oriented to those funds that are going towards recognized tax havens. This could be built upon by the work led by the OECD and their Financial Action Task Force. And well, on a topic that is very close to the challenges faced by my country, and that is money laundering, we also agreed to recommend the establishment of a clear protocol for information sharing in order to combat these money laundering activities all over the world. Well, now on a different sphere of action regarding sustainable development, we discussed the importance of ensuring food security for all, of constructing or fostering the creation of new regional food banks, as well as ensuring that clean water is available to citizens in all parts of the world. With these topics, we hope that the G20 leaders can build upon previous success in order to look towards the future. Mr. President, now on a brief message on behalf of Mexican youth, please I want to convey the message that Mexican youth belongs to a generation that transcends borders. And well, this Y20 generation, which is comprised of Mexican, Russian, Australian youth, and from many other nationalities from all over the world, wants to act within a spirit of solidarity for the common good of humanity. So Mexican youth wants to convey this message to you. We also hope that the Y20 gets established as a permanent component of the G20 agenda in the presidencies to come. Maybe G20 leaders can compromise on this matter. And well, basically, the successful hosting of this year's Y20 demonstrates that the G20 community and Russia can innovate in global governance, and we hope for the best in the negotiations to come. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое. Я хотела бы дать слово представителю Австралии, лидеру австралийской делегации.
Now let me give the floor to the leader of Australian delegation, Benjamin Jeffrey Bilter. Australia will be the next host of G20 and probably the US20 as well.
That's right. Thank you very much, Sherpa, and also welcome to our presidential aide and Prime Minister. It's an honor to be here. This is my first time in Russia. This is my first time meeting a president, and as it was stated, I'm from Australia, and as part of this year's Troika, I will be discussing some of the topics which were raised during our summit this year. So, on the topic of international financial architecture reform, we had a look at the issue of international capital markets. There were four main points which were raised on this topic. The first is with regard to over-the-counter derivatives. So we recommended that all G20 nations implement a mark-to-market valuation of underlying assets and collateral on a daily basis. Basically, this promotes stability and reduces defaults. We also recommend that there's a reassessment of the regulation of hedging and non-hedging transactions, and that the regulation regarding non-hedging transactions is strictly assessed with regards to limits and its regulation, because currently these transactions are very high risk and they don't prevent defaults. We promote the implementation of a mechanism for public-private partnership direct debiting through an intermediary. This will promote efficiency. Basically, the private sector negotiating with the government every time they meet target rollouts is a laborious task that can be easily avoided. Our third point, we recommend the introduction of a centralized, comprehensive, online public-private partnership database. Now, this will be voluntary and will promote transparency. For Russia, this will include strict control over dissemination of information and government information. For other nations, this may involve including full disclosure of PPP financing, cost estimates, and risk proposals before the projects begin. And finally, on financial reform, we believe the G20 should support the implementation of entrepreneurialism financing methods such as crowdfunding. However, we believe that repayments should be based on projected or actual profits rather than on current interest rates. We think this will be a much better representation of the investment, and this can be determined at a rate decided by the investors, and this will promote more responsible investing. On the issue of energy efficiency, under the topic of sustainable development, we raised a few interesting points as well. So first of all, we support the G20 nations meeting the post-Kyoto Protocol, a framework to reduce carbon emissions. We think this is very important and that the targets are realistic and that nations of the G20 should be involved in meeting those targets. We had some interesting discussions on the issue of a tax on carbon emissions. Now, we didn't come to a complete consensus on this, but it was recommended that that there be a tax at a national level and a progressive tax, because this is a disincentive to carbon emissions. So as an incentive, we suggest that that nations provide a reduction in the tax for constituents who make investments into sustainable development, energy efficient projects. Further to this, we recommend that there be a central body that organizes the funding for decarbonisation, implementation of infrastructure and technology transfer. So there is currently such a fund, the Green Climate Fund, and this is a relatively new fund. We think the G20 can have such a strong voice in the use of funds, and that this would be a suitable mechanism for delivering projects across the world. The creation of a regional partnership linking national energy markets to enhance cost-effective energy efficiency is another point which we think is very important. And finally, we believe that the G20 should promote energy efficiency as a key priority in future years to reduce environmental impact, preserve the economy, growth, and competition. Mr. President, we look forward to seeing you in Australia, in Brisbane next year. This is actually my hometown, and this has been an absolutely amazing summit. We have very, very high standard to adhere to. We thank you for inviting us here. This has been a fantastic opportunity for all of us.
Спасибо большое, Бенджамин. И наконец-то я хотела дать
Thank you, Benjamin. And finally, I would like to give the floor to the leader of the Russian delegation, Inala Ordin. He is the student of the High Economics School, and I once was invited at the youth forum where they were discussing the G20 agenda, and I came to know that won that contest. And I was glad that we have such active students who later become leaders. Thank you, Ksenia. Dear Mr. President, dear friends, dear guests, I would like to express our common opinion in Russian. I would like to express my gratefulness for the opportunity to meet today and to discuss our basic proposals to streamlining the policy of G20. First of all, in international financial architecture, I would like to thank all of my friends for their coming to St. Petersburg, for the opportunity to conduct such friendly, interesting, and very active discussions. I would like to touch upon several basic proposals related to the reform of G20. We agree with our colleagues that the way of global economic crisis make evident the need to deep reform of the global financial system. We have come up with some real practical proposals to create more efficient, more equitable global financial system. And first of all, I mean the formula for quota calculation of the IMF. We would like to increase the role of the GDP in this formula, and we believe that in the context of the reform of this formula, we will be able to achieve the strengthening of the economic and financial multipolarity in the world and create several preconditions for the developing countries to strengthen their positions in the IMF. At the same time, we have come up with an idea of automatic regular redistribution of the quotas. It is a very important idea that has innovative nature as we see it, and it has the potential of increasing the role of developing countries as well. And one more interesting point, we were happy to achieve compromise here with our Western partners, first of all, our colleagues, and we have decided to recommend to exclude the possibility of using regional principle in electing the heads of global financial institutions. We have printed out the list of leaders of the World Bank and IMF, and we see that mostly they are the representatives of the Anglo-Saxon world, and we believe that the experts from developing world could also become the leaders, the heads of such institutions. So we are very grateful for our Western partners to include this in our final communiqué. And one more detailed proposal is related to the forming and the need to form a special supervisory commission controlling the rating agencies within the Financial Stability Board. We believe that it would contribute to a certain monitoring of the activities of such agencies. We believe that there are some inadequate actions on the part of rating agencies sometimes. We believe that they need a certain monitoring. Vladimir Vladimirovich, if we have some time, I would like to come up with some points on social policies, which are very interesting. Yes, please go ahead. Our colleagues and we have come up with an idea to streamline the social policies of different countries and establish a certain database, social database, employment database within the G20 countries.
As far as our educational policies are concerned, we've proposed to create a special program in schools, a course, as well as to be more actively engaged and establishing special departments with the participation of financial corporations that will lead to the so-called financial inclusion, which has been discussed within the B20 framework. And the last point I wanted to dwell upon, it was also of great interest. It was very interesting to emphasize the importance for establishing special courses or even specialities, field of specializing on sustainable development. We believe that is a global paradigm which includes a financial element, a social and political element, and environmental element. So my colleagues and I have proposed to be more actively engaged and establishing such departments, such courses of study and universities. Thank you very much for your attention. That is all I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much. I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the G20 cannot agree on quotas, whereas the Y20 didn't just agree on quotas, but also on an automatic procedure for revising quotas so the young people are more progressive and they are in favor of increasing the role of developing countries. Mr. President, I'm afraid that is all we had for homework, but we can listen to your questions probably and answer to them. Probably anyone wants to add.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. President, thank you very much. My name is Matthias Nellis. I represent the German delegation. I'd first of all like to second my colleagues' appreciation of your country's hospitality. It has been an amazing time here, and it's only my second time in Russia, and I'm simply amazed by the degree of professionality and hospitality. So my question actually regards the G8. It's interesting because with the formation of the G20, we now have a new and much bigger forum. And I'd be very much interested in your opinion on the future of the G8. Because at the moment, as we stand, we discuss a lot of economic issues in this forum and also foreign policy related issues. But do you think this forum holds a valid and a solid future? Should it be broadened? Should we have China or even India in there, or what's your stance on that? And lastly, I'd be interested in your opinion on the euro crisis. I know this is not particularly a topic of the G20, but now that I have the unique opportunity to ask you in person, I'd like to I'd like to ask you on your opinion on the euro crisis. And finally, I know you're a great friend of the German people, and you've been observing the current situation very actively. I would like to ask you on your stance on the German leadership within Europe, and because it's a very controversial issue in Europe, and we Germans ourselves are very reluctant, and I'd be interested in the perspective of the biggest and most important outsider of neighbor, I should rather say, of Europe, and thank you very much.
Okay. Ну, давайте я тогда...
All right, let me start with answering your questions. I'd like to try to answer them, and I'll then give a brief comment, and we'll probably have a discussion on the issues that have already been raised here. As for the leadership of Germany and Europe, and what my attitude toward it is, I believe that is an intra-European issue. Over many years, I've witnessed Germany act very carefully about its leadership. This is an economic leadership, not a political one. Most political issues in the EU are addressed on a consensus basis, and Germany has no primacy whatsoever in this respect. But no doubt, it is an economic leader that is the greatest, the biggest European economy, not just as far as its GDP volume is concerned, but also, unlike many other economies, it feels confident, I believe, mainly due to its balanced economic policy. We can witness the outcomes now, but the foundation for them was laid as far back as the previous government was acting. Today's government, headed by Angela Merkel, I believe acts very carefully in a balanced manner, and it reflects in the best way the current economic realities. Naturally, I believe that promoting these austere measures, tough measures, can lead to a very harsh reaction in other countries, but I wouldn't like to comment on that. Well, in Germany they say this is not our glass of beer. This is not something we should be meddling in. As for the difficulties this issue gives rise to, they are of a fundamental nature. They have no relation to Germany whatsoever. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve an efficient one currency system. If the countries that have this one currency and use it are of different levels of development. They have different budget systems, different financial regulation systems. All these countries are different, and yet they have one currency. And living in such an entity is very difficult, but this doesn't mean it's impossible, however. We have a large country. Russia is a large country, as you know. The population is larger than that of Germany, twofold. We have different regions, different constituent entities of the Russian Federation. We have entities with developing economy and with developed economy, and we have to subsidize the developing constituent entities using the federal budget. That is what the EU has to do. It's exactly the same. And I believe it would be a mistake to counter that. Otherwise, they shouldn't have invited those countries with weaker economies in the first place. But since they did invite them, they should have understood they were in for certain difficulties. They should have understood they were to take some burden. Whereas those weaker economies should have understood that upon entering the EU and the European zone, the Eurozone, they were assuming certain obligations. They were making commitments. They committed themselves to a certain limitation of their economic economies and their competitive advantages. Say there are limitations on agriculture, there are quotas on the production of certain agricultural products, limitations on fishing. Since most of those countries are in the Schengen zone, there are certain limitations on tourism. At the same time, export-oriented economies receive great benefits due to the opening of the markets of other countries, and they take full advantage of that. Experts see that for sure, and we shouldn't even argue about that. But what we need to do is to make the people and export-oriented economies understand that purports to Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, Finland. The citizens of those countries should understand, even though they probably don't see every day what the advantages of a single currency for them are, or a single market are. They should understand that these benefits do exist, and they can be represented in concrete figures. And if there are benefits, then probably it's worth helping other Eurozone countries, weaker economies, catch up with the others. But this is something that the EU should explain to its citizens. And there should be no lunges against the Dutch economy, the German economy. No one should say that someone is trying to limit their sovereignty, because at one point in the past, they committed themselves voluntarily to certain limits on their sovereignty. They did it through free will, voluntarily, and they received benefits. This was agreed upon, so no one should complain about anyone. This should be joint work. We believe that the fundamentals of the European economy are such that it is going to be able to overcome the difficulties the European economy is now faced. But this is something our economic partners should be dealing now with. I believe there are different ways to address those issues, but they can only be addressed collectively if the European companies move towards the harmonization of financial and budget institutions. Their economic policy can only be efficient if they have a common understanding that they need a fiscal, budget, and financial policy, but that means moving towards a deeper level of integration. I'm not sure whether the European countries are ready for that or not. That is up to them to decide upon. Thank you very much for your question. Oh, certainly, sure, they should be disciplined. We cannot but agree with the current Chancellor of Germany. There can be no pumping financial resources from one country and injecting them into the other if there are no common rules and standards for acting and functioning. You can pour however much water you want into a barrel which has no bottom, but it will never be full. The European countries should agree upon what they need to do to make the system efficient and reliable, and only after that can they pour money into the weaker economies. Richer countries of Europe and the ECB are now taking measures, making money, and they have resources. Well, someone wants those resources to be greater, but that is up to the European countries to decide. Now, just a couple of comments. I've had a look at the declaration of the Y20, the declaration you've drafted, you've prepared. I have a few comments, and if you don't mind, a couple of questions to understand what you meant. First of all, I must admit I'm astonished how professionally, how thoroughly you've prepared this document. I must admit I'm a little bit taken aback because I just had a look at the B20 final document when I met with the business community. It was a good document, but this one, the Y20 document, is even more profound. Well, sometimes it is a little bit outre, but probably that is what makes it more interesting. First, the quest for a new model for the function of international financial institutions. Almost all these points boil down to the reform of the World Bank on the basis of the principles proposed by the developing economies. Quarter review, great representation, and the leadership of those institutions. Is it the opinion of all the participants of the Y20, or did you have any discussions? Was there anyone who disagreed with that? If you allow me, that was one of the key issues we were discussing. And we discussed it for an hour or even 2 hours. Our colleagues from the developing countries tried to come up with the arguments to be incorporated in our final document, and there was a voting procedure, and we approved the final document unanimously. But our main argument was that since the economic heft of developing countries was growing, it was worthwhile expanding their representation in the WB and the IMF. So everyone agreed with that. Well, that is curious. And I promise you I'm going to tell about that to the G20 leaders. The second point, which is of great interest to me, and I believe that is also curious, that you think there should be an audit of the existing rating agencies. I'd like to remind you that our European partners from the Eurozone and the EU countries got acquainted with the assessments presented by the rating agencies. Those were the assessments of their economies, and the rating agencies which presented those assessments were mainly from the US. European countries were not content with what they saw, and they proposed establishing their own rating agencies, and sometimes they were very harsh in their criticism. I believe there is a point, you have a point, putting forward this proposal. Probably it is necessary to act within the FSB, and create some audit for rating agencies, but I don't quite grasp what a balanced representation stands for. But I doubt this can be done. How can there be a balance between rating agencies? There's a private companies. Anyone who wants to can create such a rating agency. What is important is for this rating agency to get clout, to be taken into consideration, to have some authority, have some weight. You cannot just designate a rating agency and say that this is the basis for a balanced situation. But still, I agree that there is a point in establishing some audit procedure for those rating agencies, because it is not for the first time that our colleagues from rating agencies give assessments which can lead to certain questions. As for what you were talking about, the developing economies and the developed economies, well, I don't know whether we're going to discuss that at the G20, but it seems a little bit outmoded to me. Do you consider China to be a developed economy or not? Well, I can say that it can be designated as a developed one, even though it is in the interests of China to designate their economy as a developing economy. The Chinese are very clever and they're very adroit. They think it better to declare themselves as a developing economy, even though that is one of the biggest economies in the world, and it is a very dynamic economy. It is developing very rapidly. So all those designations are not very exact, at least as far as the G20 countries are concerned. You know that for sure. Well, probably if someone doesn't know, the very status of a developing country gives certain benefits, certain privileges. You can get some exemptions or benefits in international economic relations or within the framework of some international economic or financial institutions. But when the financial institutions are concerned, some of them tell the developing countries to wait outside the doors. So if developing countries want to get on an equal footing with the developed countries, some of their benefits and exemptions should be withdrawn and they should be included into those financial institutions. I believe that is the direction the world economy is now taking.
Though there are countries that have quotas whose economies are quite small compared with China or India, but in international financial institutions, they are represented as economic superpowers. I believe that it is also outdated. Everybody understands that, but everybody is shy of taking concrete steps, but we will move in that direction. Well, now strengthening financial regulation. In item 1, you wrote, we recognize that the existence of tax havens damage the fiscal policy of certain countries. I believe that it is said with some kind of youth defiance. I believe, first of all, this topic is a very relevant one, is an important one, and the fact that you have touched it is absolutely right. We have discussed these topics within G8, and no one leader of G8 countries, by the way, our colleague from Germany have asked about the future of G8. No one of the G8 leaders said that this topic is obsolete, this topic is not important. Everybody recognized its importance, and everybody recognized that the global problems are rooted in certain biases, in certain distortions related to financial regulations. And the negative contribution to this is tax havens and offshore jurisdictions. but the very existence of those zones damages the fiscal policy of certain countries. Should be taken with a pinch of salt. It's not like that. Some zones that are acting in a completely closed regime, of course, they damage fiscally the interests of other countries. What I'm talking about, certain countries do not obtain the due amount of tax revenues in their fiscal systems. It is right, but to streamline their costs, the existence of those offshore jurisdictions always had some sense in them. For developing economies like those in Africa or Latin America, this is a very critical problem. It is not only related to offshores, but to transnational corporations as well, because transnational companies enter the markets of Latin America, of Africa, and formulate certain rules and do not admit local authorities to participate in their economic programs. They register in the offshore zones and, in fact, evade taxation. And the problem of offshoreization has several components in that. First, there should be a certain disclosure of the final beneficiary, and the countries of the correspondent and the authorities of correspondent countries, the citizens should know who is behind a certain company. Is it a legal entity or is it a natural person? This should be completely open. It's not related to some secrets, to some national secrets, some defense secret. This is business. There should be complete openness, complete transparency. Second, there should be certain rules, certain unified rules of these zone activities. And what matters most, there should be no obscure, ununderstandable instruments of evading taxes. So at the first stage, these issues should be solved first and foremost, and then gradually to move to the de-offshoreization. For us, for the Russian Federation, this presents a problem. We have an excess use of offshore zones. We frequently, even in terms of big facilities, we frequently do not know who is the master of a certain facility, of a certain site. For example, some legal entity X is registered in Cyprus, and then it turns out that it is just a subsidiary of the entity registered in Cayman Islands, and then it turns out that that is just the granddaughter of the entity registered in Luxembourg. So it's like a Russian matryoshka. It's a very big one, it's a long one, and you cannot see what's in the end. So some certain international agreement should be concluded related to the disclosure. So I believe as a first stage, there is a need for this. Then you have some specific requirements to impose a special tax on financial flows from offshore zones. This is a very combatant proposal. I believe we should make these suggestions. Probably, I believe certain of my colleagues will faint at hearing that, but we will reinvigorate them. I will tell them that it is not my proposal, it is the proposal of our youth colleagues. Then facilitate the systemic exchange of data, very right. The elimination of tax loopholes used by third countries. I can't understand what it is about, used by third countries. Can somebody explain it to me? It is written to eliminate tax legal loopholes used by third countries. Can you please explain me what it is about? So you don't know. Who wrote this for you then? This is section B, item 1. strengthening of financial regulation. And sub-item C, eliminate tax and legal loopholes used by third countries. Probably this is exactly what I was talking about the fact that the countries with developed economies, transnational corporations are working there. Maybe we have just discussed this with our colleagues in G8. The representative of African side told us that transnational companies are coming with a full army of lawyers, and the countries do not have such resources to compete with those lawyers. So, as it is said in Russia, they are just speaking rubbish to us, and we cannot do anything without with that. But if you mean that, this is right. But this is not third countries. This is not third parties. Oh, yeah, I see. Third parties. Yeah, yes, if it is third parties, if you mean transnational corporations, then this is very right. So you need to make it a little bit more clear here. Then we go further. One of our tasks is to complete the final period of transition to Basel III standard. This is a very tangible recommendation. Next to you, you have the future governor of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, Ms. Nabiulina. She has heard you, and she will probably engage in that, but the representatives of the real sector of the economy believe that the gradual but steady regulation in this area is becoming increasingly excessive and is imposing certain limitations on the activities of financial institutions. And finally, it negatively affects the production output growth and therefore economic growth. I will not delve deeper in that problem, in that issue, but I would like to draw your attention that such problem exists and you have to look at it more closely. Later, we recognize the importance of immediate fighting of illegal activities like money laundering and tax evasion. I cannot add anything to this. I concur with you, and to create the protocol implying the collection of valuable information, including financial information. It is very right. I would like to inform you, ladies and gentlemen, that as from January 2014, Russia is beginning its presidency in FATF, International Organization Combating Illegal Money Laundering. And we will take into account your recommendation, not only within our efforts on preparing the summit of the G20 leaders, but within our activities in FATF. It is very right. The reforming of international capital markets. Well, the regulatory authorities of G20 should, on a daily basis, engage in the reassessment of basis assets and collaterals on the basis of existing market prices. Yes, this would be great. Creating further mechanisms of funding, of financing PPPs, we recommend to provide the interaction, to ensure the interaction of international financial institutions and development banks in order to contribute to further development of infrastructure projects. I believe this task is very important. Will you take part in the official events tomorrow? You will? Okay. I will make a statement tomorrow, and I believe I will make you happy because we have certain suggestions in the Russian Federation to establish certain mechanisms, and I would like our partners, the leaders of your countries, to use your suggestions with regard to those plans that we will be talking tomorrow, the plans of developing infrastructure. And there is also a need to create a centralized electronic database on PPPs. Exactly. No questions here. We will try to establish such database at a national level and then present it in order to international foundations, investment companies, our partners can use that. The management of sovereign loans and monetary policies, taking into account the factors specific to each country. We recommend the leaders of G20 to strive for financial stability and create mechanisms to regulate financial loans mechanism. Probably our German colleagues has written that under the instruction of Angela Merkel, no? I concur with that, actually. I fully concur with you. You know that here in the Russian Federation, thanks God, everything is quite reasonable. If the debt load in overall debt load in Europe is around 100%, in the States is more than 100%. Elena, do you remember that? 104%, right. Here in Russia, the sovereign debt amounts to 2.5% of the GDP. At the same time, our budget is a surplus budget, while the G8 countries are combating their deficits. So our sovereign debt is around 2.5%, and we have a surplus budget, but still we are trying to achieve the reduction, the improvement of other fundamental macroeconomic indicators. But overall, Russian economy is okay so long, and we believe that we will preserve this state of our economy in the future, given that the real disposable incomes of our population last year grew by 4.6%, and for 3 months of the current year, for 5.3% for the first months of the current year. These indicators are quite serious. I was also mentioning the unemployment problem in America. We have already discussed that. Several European countries have very difficult situation in that regard, 25% as a minimum, and among youth, 40%, 50%. In Greece, for example, this rate is above 60%. In Spain as well, very difficult situation. In Russia, the unemployment has reached historical minimum, 5.5%. Of course, there are certain concerns here to be addressed. We ask ourselves a question, how we should achieve growth, due to what? We have full employment. And the answer to that is only one: to modernize our economy, to improve the labor productivity. But it's a separate issue. Well, this one is good. We call upon G20 leaders to know the impossibility of parallel debt restructuring and existence of voucher funds that invest in the high-risk securities. This is very good suggestion. I will try to convey to my colleagues. The sustainable development, yes, it's very right. Cannot add anything to it. And of course, the commitment to work in this area by business community in order for them to achieve greater influence on the shaping of labor market, to influence the efficient functioning of education system in line with labor markets currently and for the short term. It's not an impossible task. It is realizable, especially if we move along your lines. And it's good that you know that regarding the jobs database, in G20. Of course, the existence of such information would facilitate the mobility of the citizens, but not to a great degree, because there are visa barriers. A mic to the speaker, please. The speaker. Yes, we understand that it is quite difficult, but we should move towards it. Now, another provision. We support the implementation of state programs of financial aid aimed at improving life quality of poor populations within the efforts to combat poverty. It is a very right wish, a very right recommendation. But you know that all G20 countries are engaged in these efforts. What we are drawing more and more attention to is the fact that the donorship has sense in it when it falls on the fertile ground, when the recipient countries solve the issues of corruption fighting, when the resources are used efficiently. We should do that together with our friends and partners from developing economies. Energy efficiency, quite a big chunk is dedicated to it. I can actually speak about it till the morning. It is very right. All the types of alternative energy should be developed, should be supported, but we should be realistic. We should remain realistic. Of course, you have a youth forum, but you are all adults. You understand pretty well what is going on currently. You know that the efficiency of the alternative energy is not competitive compared with the nuclear energy and hydrocarbon energy. It stands no comparison in terms of efficiency and in terms of competitiveness. It is not competitive. It is alive only due to the subsidies, but it doesn't mean that it should not be developed. A lot of effort should be put into that, into hydrogen energy, into solar energy, into tidal energy, wind energy, but everything should be improved here because it is accompanied by some negative phenomena. You know how the wind farms are noisy and how they vibrate. Even the worms are escaping them. They are coming off the ground and escaping because they cannot stand it. So the wind farms have some environmental effects as well. But it doesn't mean that nothing should be done about it. We should aim at improvements, developing of infrastructure.
I've said that it's very important. Your recommendations are quite good, and you paid attention to another very important aspect that could be discussed for a while. That's food security and environmental protection. Well, I looked through everything you've written here. It should be used not only within the framework of G20 discussions. It is even more important, although we discuss it during the G20 events. But what is more important is to discuss these issues within the WTO. You know about the discussions underway between developing and developed economies. Well, there's nothing to hide here. Everybody is pursuing one's interests and goals. We need to touch ground to find consensus between developing economies, and we need to generate benefits for those who produce something. There is a reverse side of this coin, which is even more important. No matter how much assistance we send to the developing economies, it will never be enough until the economies of the developing countries become more efficient, more competitive. That's what we should achieve instead of increasing direct financial investments to those countries. If we continue to renew the poverty in the developing economies, we could keep sending assistance to those countries, but frankly speaking, it will not be fair. We would be responsible if we create modern democratic principles of global trade and international economic relations. And that's probably it. I'll come to a conclusion here. I would like to thank you for this work. It is very interesting and very substantial. I was very surprised by it. I believe we would use it anyways. Now I'd like to answer the question of our German colleague with regard to the fate of the G20, or sorry, G8. The speaker corrects himself. This mechanism has been underway for a while, and it is not legally binding. However, it could be serving as a platform for coordinating positions of developed economies, and this platform could be very useful and very efficient for all. Let me stress, and it is important to listen to all the opinions and avoid the situation when only one point of view is being dominant and only one decision is being made, in the same way as it took place in German socialist parties and socialist parties of the German movements. The various approaches should be discussed and various approaches should be adopted. That's quite a good platform. However, I believe that such an extended platform for discussions as G20 is more in line with current reality. It is hard to imagine that without China, India, Brazil, Mexico, coordinated decisions could be made, and so that all stakeholders comply with these decisions, because final goal, final results depend on the behavior of all the stakeholders. That is why we cannot do without participation of these countries. We should put it frankly, without them, no efficient decisions could be made. Thank you very much, Vladimir Vladimirovich. You wanted to ask one question?
Mr. President, I would like to ask you about youth unemployment. Thank you. My name is Teresa Astolfi. I'm from Spain. I would like to ask you about youth unemployment, taking into account that growth is one of the priorities of the Russian presidency of the G20, and we have discussed youth employment, and has been one of the key issues of our discussions. What do you recommend in order to promote youth employment?
Well, you know, it's one of the key issues that will be discussed. Before all leaders got together and we started talking, nothing could be recommended, because it wouldn't be right to give recommendations without participation of those countries who face these problems daily. Without financial consolidation, without financial politics that is implemented in good faith, nothing could be achieved. No matter how difficult it is at first stage, take into account inflation, and by the way, Russia keeps fighting inflation, which is quite high. I believe it is even higher than in Spain, and we have something to overcome. I said that certain indicators are quite optimistic and attractive, but there are certain problems that haven't been solved. In 2011, inflation amounted to 6.2 or 6.1%. Last year, it grew and amounted to 6.6%. This year, up to today, it is accounting for 7%. We are going to undertake certain measures to reduce inflation, and I'm convinced we will succeed in this. So I'm saying that we also have problems, and final interest rate in banks depends on inflation, and investments into production depend on the interest rate. The volume of economy, employment depend on investments, so it is a vicious circle. And if you are hinting that one should give more money to the economy, one should invest more into the economy, that is very encouraged by European analytical experts, then I cannot say that it is the most efficient solution, particularly in the longer term. Of course, it is the easiest way, either to borrow more or to get printed money. And it seems that that's it. We inflate economy with new money, we maintain existing jobs, and that's it. But what is to be done in the future if it is not ensured by real growth, by fundamental basics of macroeconomics? It will stall anyways. So in the outcome, the final recommendations should be the golden section. We should try to protect macroeconomic indicators to improve them, and we should incrementally promote the job creation, new jobs creation, take into account current situation on the market. I support the efforts of the Spanish governments to tackle these problems. Thank you very much, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Well, I believe there are too many people willing to ask questions. I feel sorry for you, but...
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm the delegate of Indonesia. I'm really glad to be here and would like to applaud the presidency of Russia to have hosted this event. I have many Indonesian friends who study in Russia, and I have Russian friends now, just now. And every time I ask my Indonesian friends who study in Russia about what do they feel about the country, they always say that they admire Russian youth for their sense of patriotism and their pride to their country, and also having seen how the Russian presidency really include Y20 in the whole process of G20 consultancy. I believe that Russia is taking youth seriously, the role of youth seriously. And now one of the main trends in all nations in the world is the national youth policy. Many countries have specifically made their national youth policy in regards with tackling the problem of youth unemployment, but not only that, but also comprehensive policy on how youth we can invest more in youth. And my question would be how committed and what kind of national youth policy, if there is or if there isn't, like what kind of national youth policy that the Russian Federation has and will implement in the near future. Thank you.
Very complex question and very unpleasant one. It is unpleasant because I cannot tell you with pride that yes, indeed, a certain program has been implemented and certain events under this program have been envisaged. We do not have any such program as a comprehensive framework. Nevertheless, various areas of social activity are taking into account the youth development. For example, we are putting forth the goal to tackle a number of educational problems up to 2018, taking into account the school education, higher education, vocational training. There are certain figures that have to do with salary level of teachers at schools. There are certain indicators that have to do with correlation of amount of students per one teacher, and there are certain issues that have to do with the infrastructure development for youth training to prepare them for adult life, for labor market. That's the first thing. We've got a different program that has to do with demography. It is tackling demographic problems, support to childhood and motherhood, support given to children who decided to give birth to the second or third kids. I know that that in Indonesia there are more than 300 million people, and that problem is not that relevant for Indonesia. However, colleagues from European countries would understand me, because the support to increasing birth rate and support of motherhood and childhood is a very important and relevant issue. And thanks to our programs in this field, our birth rate is unprecedentedly high compared to the results of 19 years, and that's quite an achievement, and it has to do with young people who are willing to create families, to give birth to children. So that's the direct support we are giving to our youth. The same holds true of the residential policy, living standards policy. In various areas and regions of the Russian Federation, special benefits and regimes for young people are created. They give preferential mortgages when a child is birthed. Part of this loan is written off. Not everywhere. In certain regions, this loan is written off completely. The same holds true of such an area as sport development. This year, we are hosting a number of large sports events, university games in Kazan, the Republic of Tatarstan, field and track championship, martial arts championship, rugby World Cup. Next year, we will have Winter Olympics in Sochi. We all understand that sport development and physical training are connected with the youth in the first place. And although we don't have such a comprehensive, detailed youth policy program, although governmental bodies are trying to structurize it, to put it into one package, nevertheless, Russia is pursuing a target-oriented youth support program. Thank you. You know, I believe your schedule is quite tough. Well, quite outstanding people, representatives of largest investment funds are waiting for me for a while already. And if I'm not there in the nearest half an hour, they'll start eating caviar and drinking vodka, and nothing will turn out of this conversation. Well, I believe that's probably it. So let's thank Vladimir Vladimirovich. You know, in your presence, I would like to thank other people who participated in this event, Roma Chukov, and over there, Stas Voskresensky is hiding. He's from Kaliningrad. He's the head of the organizing committee, and thanks to him, all this process was organized. I would like to thank everybody, and everybody is willing to make a joint photo. Thank you very much.